The second incarnation of the Project Global triptych, this year water, last year power, and next year ground, is part of the Berlage's 3-year multi-format entitled Carrying Capacities. Project Global Water investigates the water cycle relevant as both input and output for the metropolitan metabolism, examining Vienna and Mexico City. The thematic spans in terms of scale and lens, from geopolitical aspects to the individual human body, seeking to explore water as a crucial factor in the design of the built environment. Vienna served as an exemplar of a modern planned metropolis related to water infrastructure and regulations. Mexico City, a city flooding and at the same time running out of water, formed the ground for interrogation throughout the semester. The outcomes have been incrementally built up within 3 segments: the lexicon, the atlas, and the architectural projects. Through keywords, objects, institutions, ideals, and failures, 60 lemmas set up a lexicon, aiming to explore water systems and their components on a global scale. From fresh water to waste, and from water culture to conflicts and control, the selected lemmas interrogate the space between optimization and disaster, mythology and politics, potable water and commercialization, underlying a collective understanding of the framework. 11 maps of Mexico's past, present, and future, and 4 mini-atlases related to the water cycle, relate the principles, as documented in the lexicon, to the specific geographical, social, and cultural characteristics of Mexico City and the surrounding territory. From the ancient Altepetl to the 2021 ninth largest metropolitan area in the world, the Valley of Mexico has always been dominated by water issues throughout history. The aquifer, along with the water supply, consumption, and waste, remain the 4 main reference points that inject the metropolitan metabolism to the natural flows of water. The atlas explored these stages and formulated site-specific questions relevant to water issues that served as starting points for a set of architectural projects. 10 speculative contributions are situated within the water cycle, addressing the greater territory of Mexico City. The proposals draw upon the lexicon and the atlas, continuing the build-up lines of inquiry and argumentation. Addressing various topological conditions, the 10 projects establish unique relationships with the ground, the city, and the landscape. The 10 architectural projects strive to ensure that the loop of the water cycle is never threatened, proposing a stable water supply for the inhabitants of Mexico City. To resurrect Mexico City from its current predicament, the contributions propose a future with the possibility to expand the water systems through different time frames for both singular and prototypical projects, while growing within its territorial conditions. The water-related inputs and outputs for the metropolitan metabolism are broken down to 3 categories: aquifer, water supply, consumption, and waste, composing Mexico City's water cycle. When facing the paradox of a city flooding and at the same time running out of water, how can architecture contribute towards balancing the aquifer's twofold nature? While inequality in water distribution remains a recurrent contention, how can communal interventions contribute towards a new water supply system within the existing urban fabric? Rather than building more atotonilcos or emissors, how can organizational structures that activate landscapes be implemented in order to metabolize wastewater?
Good afternoon, everyone. We begin with a video on the first category, which is the aquifer. So the video will introduce aquifer along with the 3 architectural projects that provide solutions for aquifer recharge in Mexico City.
An aquifer is an underground layer of porous rock, saturated with groundwater. A vital water source holding precipitation that has infiltrated the soil with both natural infiltration and artificial injection recharge potential. In Mexico City, which lies in an endorheic basin, over 70% of potable water is derived from the regional aquifer system. At the same time, groundwater is extracted at a faster rate than it can replenish itself. Impermeable surfaces are paved over natural recharge areas, and agricultural wastewater is withdrawn to the ground when the natural filtration process is not enough to remove all the contaminants. In the case of Mexico City, the aquifer overexploitation, the urbanization sprawl, and the lack of wastewater treatment are leading to subsidence, severe flooding, and eventual water shortage due to groundwater depletion. 3 architectural projects explore the aquifer recharge possibilities throughout Mexico City, reflecting upon site-specific landscapes. By exposing lava strips, manifesting abandoned water parks, and reclaiming volcanic terrains, the contributions build upon the aquifer's natural and artificial recharge potential, aiming towards a long-term groundwater capacity balance.
The utilization of the porous volcanic terrain that lies above high compressive clays involves the possibility of changing the underlying groundwater paradigm. The 80 square kilometer territory that was covered by the lava of the Sidle volcano, known as Pedregal, delineates a unique landscape that could be activated as a recharge entry point, allowing the natural infiltration of the water that has stopped by the ongoing expansion of the urban fabric. The project suggests an alternative to traditional water management by densifying the public spaces with a systemic perspective consisting of 3 acts. Act 1. Scar tissue. Through the act of extraction, in emptying between public zones, the restoration of the lava landscape is accomplished to suggest a novel recharge alternative that supplements the traditional methods. Act 2. Water dike. The height difference from the act of extraction is solved by the creation of a buffer wall that resembles the dike structure. Act 3. Airways. The interventions of the restored lava bed forms are minimal and function as bridges. From Luis Barragan's town planning execution in the Pedregal at the beginning of the 50s to today, the unique volcanic terrain has eroded. Tons of concrete and other materials covered the porous soil and blocked every possibility of alternative recharge of the aquifer in the most prominent area. Part of the extracted material is reconstructed and reinforced by concrete not only to support the adjacent existing structures, but also to protect the surrounding environment from flooding. The relationship with the lava rocks is restricted to particular points that assist the support of the structure and by which the interventions are suspended or placed. The isolated outcrops of black volcanic rock are only remnants of a sublime landscape. The chaotically expanding city is deprived of its historical geoheritage. The contribution is influenced by Barragan's early approach to the Pedregal, proposing a public water garden over the buried fragments of the lava landscape.
By reversing the direction of water flow on its site, Boca de Stalo is not only a rehabilitation of the city's aquifer, but a resurgence of people's dream of water amenities. This project transforms the abandoned El Rolo Water Park, located in the third section of Chapultepec, into a civic garden, preserving its spectacularism by placing aquifer recharge equipment in the landscape, with its role as a regulating vessel to Mexico City standing crucial. The similarity between the megalomaniac formal language of leisure amenities and water infrastructure reflects on the city's water metabolism on 2 levels. First, on the Federal District's current aquifer replenishment program that enhances Chapultepec's hydrological functionality, then on the historical groundwater overexploitation associated with recreational spaces. While the foremost goal in the rehabilitation master plan is to keep the surface water inside the drainage basin as long as possible for infiltration, such a process can still take up years. Hence, recharging through injection wells becomes a complementary approach. Directly pumping advanced reclaimed water to the aquifer for non-potable use serves as an alternative path for the water cycle, for it bridges wastewater from the adjacent urban sprawl to its aquifer. This garden can be understood as a non-hierarchical landscape architecture, where the technocratic logic of the groundwater recharge apparatus superimposes on the scenographic spatial structure of an amusement park. 5 clusters of injection wells occupy the ground of former water slides, each of which has its own characteristic responding to the form and function of the antecedent slide, while the vibrant purple pipes replace the deteriorated plastic tubes. The pools, now all drained, become niches for visitors to rest. Here, in the center of every niche is where the reclaimed water gets pumped into the aquifer. Through the cool metallic surface of sloughs, the ruin of amusement attraction, and subtropical highland plants, the recharge garden creates a dry landscape with an abundance of water that questions the role of public recreational space in the city's water cycle.
Located in the southeast of Mexico City, Sierra de Ahuizotl, or Sierra de Santa Catarina as it is known today, is home to a range of visually striking monogenetic volcanoes that run the risk of becoming endangered due to extensive mining activity. One of the most dramatic and controversial elements of Mexico City, the Volcanic Chain, is currently a neighborhood park consisting of an important water conservation zone, a protected natural landscape, and a mining paradise. During the rainy season, the rainwater runoff from the mountain hills, combined with the deterioration of the land due to mine exploitation, is causing severe flooding to the adjoining neighborhood of Iztapalapa. At the same time, the porous material that is constantly being extracted from mining the area is considered the most efficient soil type to naturally recharge the city's aquifer, having the ability to absorb and purify water. This paradox opens up the opportunity for a strategic reclamation plan once all mining activity is over. Given the specificity of the site, the project is twofold. On the one hand, the already formed cavities and scars on the volcanoes form natural recharge areas filled with water with minor landscape interventions. Retention ponds, areas for water sources, infiltration terraces, gravity injection wells, and wetlands are formed in order to redirect, delay, and temporarily retain water within the site. On the other hand, the volcano chain operates as a well-oiled water machine to meet both internal and the surrounding neighborhood's needs. For that purpose, infrastructure such as cargo funiculars, water towers, and cableways are added in order to transfer, exploit, and store water. The project collects rainwater from the deepest point of Iztapalapa and relocates it to the Sierra using a funicular system. There, the input is purified and stored to the Xaltepec crater, which at the same time operates as a pumped energy plant to power the funicular machinery. The clean water that reaches the ground is then distributed for residential use. The funicular constantly transfers water buckets throughout the area in order to refill the wetlands and eventually stores the water to the large reservoir that also serves as a natural recharger, the crater of Mantle Tetlaman, the highest point in Iztapalapa. The Mexico City aquifer system serves as a vital water source with infiltration and injection recharge potential that runs the risk of depletion due to groundwater overexploitation and the unmanaged recharge by wastewater related to irrigation. At the same time, the aquifer constitutes the cause for the city's recurring subsidence and severe flooding. With natural recharge areas covered up in asphalt and the urban sprawl taking over the aquifer discharge points, both natural and artificial alternative recharge solutions stand crucial for the future of Mexico City.
Thank you, Georgia, Hank, and Maria. We now have 20 minutes for a group discussion. So I would invite the guests if you have any immediate thoughts on how these three projects very differently deal with the volcanic terrains and aquifer recharge solutions.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. And if no one starts, I would love to start because this is a topic that is very compelling to me. Actually, it's been the motive of my research for the last 12 years. And it's super exciting to see how it's been considered in other countries around the world and how input from people that have never lived in this basin are able to understand the problem and come up with ideas that are hard to find for people living here constantly. And that's obviously because we are used to deal with certain ways of managing water. And it's always very enriching to have input from people that see it in very different ways. And I was very happy to see the three projects and how they have been able to convey ideas that have been placed into the design table at some points, and then to understand different ways of and innovative ways of managing water, and third, to use existing infrastructure in very different ways that are directly related to aquifer recharge. So in the first place, discussing the project, the first project, which is in Pedregal, it recalls the ideas from Pedro Camarena, whom you might have heard in this podcast, the 99% Invisible podcast, where he talks specifically about the possibilities of rocks and of this volcanic area to become a very strong recharge area in Mexico. And it's very compelling to see ways of putting it in place and of understanding how we can start uncovering rock and really making a project out of this idea, which has somehow been done at the university, but that really disregards this possibility because the neighborhoods in which this volcanic ground exists have been idealized more as residential areas without really considering the landscape features, both as an entity of character, but also as an entity of reclaiming what the basin is and the existence, the future existence of the basin. So I have to say that I like very much this project. It's a landscape project, and I think it could become a detonator to start working on these Pedregal areas, on these open spaces around not only the neighborhood of Pedregal, but also the surrounding areas of Pedregal, even the side of Ajusco and of Sierra Chichinautzin. So that was super nice project. The second one about water parks, I think it's really exciting, and it's an idea that is new, and I think it is a very good possibility. It's still super utopic in the way it's depicted, because you have these enormous infrastructures, and I think you need to put people into the rendering so that we can start understanding what's the relationship between the existing park and these new very prominent infrastructures. But I think the idea of reusing these water parks, not as recreational features, but more as infrastructures that also have recreation embedded, is a strategy that needs to be put in place. Actually, it's completely feasible. It's something that has to be done, and that should start becoming a practice in the next years, even shorter time, in the next months. And then the third project, the project about Sierra Santa Catarina, it's also very nice and exciting to see this project. I have been working specifically in Sierra Santa Catarina during the last 3 years, and looking a lot closely into the craters of the volcanoes and the type of soil and the possibilities that this area has. And it's a natural reserve that's completely embedded in the urban fabric. And I was happy to see both these ideas of how to have basins, retention basins, wetland systems, which I'm not that sure about, but you always have in mind the possibility of these features becoming recharge points. And that's the most important thing, because it's usually a mistake when people try to use the side of the hill, or the hillsides, as only retention areas and cleaning wetlands, when it's the place where infiltration is most feasible to happen. So it's good that you show in the past diagrams always, if it's a wetland, that water can go down. If it's a retention basin, that it's not only holding water, but it's a place where excess of water can be stored and then infiltrated. And then finally, the funicular system, which is already in place right now in Iztapalapa, not in Tláhuac, which is the other side of the Sierra, but that could become a really interesting system it's in counterposition with the mining system, which could become something similar in this way of extracting and placing material elsewhere. So you're talking about how excess water in the lake bed could be brought through this system into the mountains and into the places where it's more feasible to infiltrate. And I don't know if it's by cubes, by these cubes that you're showing that go around. Probably it could be a piping system. There are actually other aerial piping systems around the world, in Africa and elsewhere, but it gives a hint of how aerial infrastructures could become a way of managing water in this area of Mexico City. I think it's fantastic work, and thank you for being interested in our city.
Yes, I agree with Loretta. First of all, thank you all, Sanne and Filip, Salomon, for the invitation. And it's a pleasure for me to see how you've evolved from the Atlas. I mean, I wasn't there for the lexicon conversation, but I can actually see the connection of how you weaved the first work towards this final project. So I think that's very commendable to all of you. And in terms of these specific projects, there's very interesting speculations from Maria, thank you, and Georgia. I think you all do very similar things, not architecturally, but strategically speaking, that I think are very interesting. And I agree with Loretta, these are things that we don't usually work with here. This sort of like, I wouldn't call them utopias, but these speculations that allow for furthering the possibilities within architecture to engage in these topics. So I really love the large scale of the projects that you've presented. They all the first one has this huge scale of the city, of all the territory that was lava produced, and that has this very unique landscape. But then when you talk about Chapultepec and the possibility of infiltration, also speaks of like a larger infrastructure. And then finally, the Sierra de Santa Catarina, which is also one of the main volcanic areas of the city that are very promising, and nobody's talking in this scale of operations from an architectural standpoint. I also agree, and I'm not sure Loretta was mentioning this, but well, she did say something about the proximity, like people and how people relate to these infrastructures, which I think is also very relevant. I would also extend it to vegetation, because the project on Chapultepec's water park does mention vegetation and how this tropical landscape sort of like takes over part of the infrastructure and of the space itself. But we could also speak of not only people, but also vegetation and also species that could happen in the first project, sort of like moving, because you're producing this idea of a connection of lava ecosystem, which is very interesting in terms of the ecosystem services that can be provided because of that geography and because of that form that you're using. And on the other hand, the project on the volcano, also just using all of these craters and all of these areas that have been, some of them already abandoned by the mining industry, and giving it a different aspect. I think you mentioned like water machine with all of these funiculars and cableways, which could, I think they could work, and the Airways that Loretta was already mentioning as a reclamation project from an architectural standpoint. I think they're all very provocative, and they make, one of the things that they do that I believe is one of the most interesting things about the studio is that they visibilize these sectional relationships of water resources and lack of with the surface, and what a common citizen would see. And so you make those things visible in a very special way. So you're adding this cultural value to architecture and landscape, which I believe is the way that you're addressing the question of the studio and the questions that yourselves have posed on your work at the end of the presentation. So I would just would like to add that there are certain things that you do through these speculations that are also interesting to me. For instance, in the case of the volcanic project of Maria, you add this perspective, like the idea of the views of the city, which is also something, you mentioned the height of these volcanoes, and it's probably one of the references that we've lost in the city. So all of you bring about something that has been lost in the evolution of the city, or in the evolution of the cultural evolution of what the city is. And so these views, this rock, this ground, and this ability to provide a service for the aquifer also becomes a part for a cultural aspect that to be brought about, and that already exists locally, right? And so I think that's very, unearthing this original value becomes very relevant to the project. In terms of the mining scars, I really like the idea of the mining scars that Maria was mentioning. Going back to Heng Yu's Boca del Cielo Recharging Garden project, I think this idea of a dry landscape that actually reverses the direction of the water flow and reverses metabolism in this very clear way, I think is amazing. Actually, currently they called it Chernobyl, just because of the aspect it has, and because it's been appropriated by young people with, with skateboarding and BMX activities. And I think this totally goes along with what already happens in that place, naturally. And I mean, here the thing is, there's something tricky about reversing this metabolic function, which is the cost of it. So going one way or the other has repercussions in terms of what the benefits are and what the costs of it are. And there's a temporal aspect to it as well. In terms of the benefits of going in, like injecting this water, are much like further in time, like they provided the possibility of water sustainability for the city, and the other way around, it's only providing for the very immediate need of water that usually comes from the aquifer, as you already researched. So I think that there are some tricky things, but the provocation is amazing. And I absolutely love this reference between tubes and slides. That is very playful and interesting. And to finish off the Pedro Galore project, which I thought also was very witty as a recharge entry, I love the idea of the geoheritage and this image that relates also to the work of artistic projects in Mexico City, such as Espacio Escultórico, which you probably know at the UNAM, you know, and that has this very geometric, clear geometric shapes, which you started using with these lines, and you know how all of these topographic differences become a very clear geometry that reinforces the idea of linearity, but also how water reacts to that topography, right? And the lightness of the proposal that you're adding. Then there are some later on like differences between the first image that you put in terms of the aerial view with all of these circles and different geometries, and then going back to only like a linear project with mostly courtyards, which I think could be followed up with other types of uses. But congratulations to the three of you. This is amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Filip, for the microphone. Thanks, guys. It's very interesting projects, I have to say. I was wondering when you were talking, so these projects are essentially somehow you're resolving what would essentially be a question an engineer would try to resolve. And you guys are, of course, have the training of architects, okay? And I was wondering when you were talking, you know, how would one try to assess or evaluate the project, the ideas, the very interesting kind of systemic conceptual things that you've put out there? How would one try to imagine selecting, let's say, what should be done in these situations? Should it be, for example, one wonders, the amount of water that can be replenished in the aquifer? Should it be what is happening on the surface above ground? What I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? How this project should be discussed or talked about?
Hi, thank you very much for your comments. Regarding your question, Chris, I think that for sure all these projects, what ties them is their relationship with their context somehow. So it's not only about it's of course about the amount of water that is needed to replenish the aquifer, but it's also about the type of soil they refer to, and at the same time the territory they're surrounded with, or the existing infrastructure, for example, in Hank's case, with the water parks, etc.
Yes, somehow they are trying to deal with the fact that there is a complete system that everything is complementary to each other. So you cannot talk only for the surface. You also talk for the soil and the groundwater. So somehow I think they deal in the whole water management. They have a systemic approach towards the water management as a whole when it comes to the aquifer.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I know that both in me and Hank's concept, in Hengst, it treats somehow wastewater. In mine, it collects rainwater. Somehow they work exactly as George said, as a system, as a machine.
Let me then wonder about this in a different way. An aquifer isn't recharged simply by poking a hole in it and just pumping water, obviously, right? It takes some time. I don't know, I have no idea how long, but it does depend on what the condition is of the aquifer layer itself. Right? So we imagine that these projects that you set forth on day one really start to function or become something else quite some time down the way. During that period, we have the expectation that one day everything will be fine because all the water will slowly trickle into the aquifer. But until that period arrives, we are left with the pieces that are above ground or somewhere else. And then you know, the possibility that somehow even more withdrawals will happen faster than you can actually you know, refill the aquifer is also a very strong possibility for the near future. Therefore, I do wonder at the end of the day, right, they do work as systems, yes, conceptually, that's very clear. But when we break it down into the parts that you would take over as, let's say, the designer, are you the designer of the above ground or the underground? I do wonder.
So what I think, or what I found through this research and designing process is that this cannot be only done by this technology evolution or like keep iterated itself, so that we pump a lot of water simultaneously down to the aquifer in the basin, but how people's habit or how people's attention being driven away from this. So take myself's project as an example. So if we don't, or like if we keep using water like this way, it doesn't really matter how much water we pumped into the aquifer, it will deplete one day. But then I think us three projects somehow trying to like evolve the other way around to think about this way to use the water, and it's a relationship that's 200 or 300 meters under our feet. So I think that's the thing I found in this project.
In a way, what you mean, Hang, is that they somehow are visible and somehow try to drive the attention of people at the same time, because of course it's not like we recharge the aquifer today and tomorrow morning we have water, right? It can be 50 years afterwards, or and even more. But that's, I mean, it's something you need to think about earlier in order to at least have some chances towards the future on the one hand. And on the other hand, that this somehow, even the scale of the projects themselves is complementary to somehow people's way of thinking, right, about water.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta, and thank you, Elena. We now move on to the next category, but before that, we have a 10-minute break. So we will be back here at 4 o'clock.
Hi, Sanne.
Hello, great to see you here.
You too, thank you.
Hello, Natalia.
Hi, how are you?
We're doing well.
Good. Nice to see you, Zane.
Yeah, great to have you here.
Let's wait for a few more of us to return. All right. Good afternoon from Delft. Welcome, or welcome back if you were here before already, to our presentations of Project Global Water. First, let me welcome our guests, Margarita Flores, Natalia Galvez, Chris Romanos, Andrea Soto. So this is the supply consumption part of the water cycle on which we will focus for the next 45 minutes. Ryan, when you're ready, you can start the video.
Mexico City metropolitan area has a complex network of water supply that faces a confrontational crisis of providing potable water for an overwhelming demand of 20 million residents, with an average daily consumption of 130 liters per person. Political conflicts, economic declines, and the ascension of social inequalities have resulted in the inadequacy of water supply, depletion of aquifers, maintenance inefficiency, distrust in water quality, high-cost substitutes, and far-reaching inaccessibility. 4 architectural projects explored the potential spectrum of urban water supply and consumption systems, from the informal settlements on extreme morphologies to mathematical concessions in existing metropolitan high-rises. Mexico City's future to achieve a state of salvation from its current predicament is to rely on additional and external sources of supply, triggered with ingenious engineering, prudent utilization, prototypical local termini, and sustainable closed systems to mitigate the fragility in water flow. Tlalocan, a utopian underground, provides skillful possibilities of water access through the large canyon, constituting 3 giant sinkholes that emerge in the Mexico City borough of Iztapalapa, caused by the leakages in water infrastructure. The proposal of a neighborhood of inverted 9-stepped pyramids leads down to the nearest water source of groundwater and the first level of aquifer, alleviating the scarcity of daily access to potable water for the inhabitants of Iztapalapa. A buffering network of water catchments and filtration systems to collect water runoff on the street level, the top edge of the sinkholes, accentuates water supply by replenishing the aquifers, especially during the months of the heavy rainfall. The first 3 levels of this engineer design iteration connect the existing city to the subterranean neighborhood, while the water table on the 4th level and the water spouts integrated with the housing on the subsequent 4 levels provide a system of channels and walkways inspired by the Aztec Empire for water to flow down. The materiality of the retaining walls allow for a natural water filtration system, creating water features that provides the inhabitants with communal spaces. The final level poses a water treatment facility to collect potable water for the residents supplied through rainfall, groundwater, and the aquifer to form an underground living environment dedicated to water.
Quattro Culturas is a prototypical proposal for a multi-generational dwelling through an existing high-rise, conjunto urbano, that was constructed in a specific social setting of economic growth period for the families of state enterprises. The complex, originally an integration of commercial, recreational, educational, and residential facilities, remains a mere monument of the past economic growth after the 1985 earthquake, with unfinished restoration, broken infrastructure, and leakages in pipelines that make up 50% of water supply, hiding abandonment and exploitation of the building environment. The paradox of such apartments remains in between the high unaffordability due to prestigious location and earthquake-damaged buildings occupied by low-income residents. Collective use as a new culture, Quattro Culturas, mitigate the dependency on the government's inefficiency to unite the residents of Tlatelolco in smaller communities with independent water cycles in their homes through an exchange of square meters for water access and building safety. The initial stage to achieve this building transformation occurs as an earthquake reinforcement program by using water as a part of reinforcement through rainwater catchments on the top of the building to counteract shear movement, through hydraulic elevators as a safety exit during the earthquakes, and through a new water supply system for rainwater catchment in the side pillars. The abandoned first floor occupies shared water facilities for the neighborhood, supplied by water collected from the roof and courtyards. The high levels, with adequate water access due to unsuitable pumping, function as emergency rainwater facilities with showers, washer, kitchens, toilet, and grey-water treatment tanks to guarantee water access during the transformation of flat from private family apartments to the collective dwellings for a group of inhabitants. The proposed reformation subdivides the existing structure of the apartment into 3 studios with common water facilities. Share water facilities strategically designed in the center of the floors, leaving the possibility of using the existing standpipe to provide an alternate water supply source adhering to rainwater catchment and grey-water treatment. Thus, a new self-sustained water cycle introduced in the existing building can provide water through the 2 extremities of Mexico City's climate, by rainwater supply in heavy rainfall seasons, and by operating as a closed water cycle through grey-water reuse during dry months. Prototypes of shared water facilities are prefabricated and designed in different configurations, catering to the different building types of the 1960s collective housing to provide alternative solutions for water supply, thus stimulating affordable housing in the metropolitan city. Peripheries of Colonias Populares, a contribution proposing a prototypical public spine, aims to provide 2 distinct water supply networks that operate independently but complement each other to provide water for the 480,000 people residing in the informal settlements by the southwestern foothills of Mexico City. These informal settlements, struggling due to social inequality, have deficient water supply due to leakages amidst pipelines below the metropolitan city. With contaminated water from faucets and forced to rely on private companies for water,
The daily lives of these residents remain an inconvenience while spending 1/4 of the day and more than 10% of their income arranging water access. The Cutzamala system, which provides 18% of Mexico City's water, lifts water over more than 1,000 meters and terminates 300 meters below the foothills occupied by these informal settlements, circumventing and leaving them without potable water. The problem arises in the intermediate scale of distribution, where the negligence of maintaining interstitial infrastructure, such as underground pipelines and pressure pumps, become the factors disrupting distribution. The project introduces a new tangent in the Cutzamala system with a modest aqueduct that follows the contour logic of gravitation and provides potable water through branched water mains to households in all informal settlements without any expense on pumps. The pipelines within this network remain on the ground to provide better maintenance possibilities and avoid leakages, thus being prudent. The proposal also aims to capture rainwater on a communal scale through a new public spine that acts as a water collection device intersecting all houses while providing structure and collectivity to the informality of these settlements. The two strategies tie up to channel a parallel route for water that follows the laws of gravity and provides alternative water supply systems as a prototypical self-built solution. The proposed water infrastructure becomes the ground for artificial topography for the informal settlements that remain undefined and lack collective interventions, such as pavements and public squares, to introduce buffering moments of infrastructure by creating privileged spaces within its network for communal gatherings. These buffering basins provide water for consumption to a hierarchy of shared facilities supplied with treated rainwater, while the Cutzamala continues feeding individual households. The notion of water distribution through the communal public spine integrates with the terrain's morphology, providing significant interstitial spaces in its urban design, thus resolving water shortage and vulnerability of the distribution network.
Pipe Dream, a closed-loop water cycle system, aims to lower the dependency on the municipal water supply by proposing the insertion of self-built water infrastructure into the existing fabric of Magdalena Contreras. The informal settlements in Mexico City are built in the conservation area, and therefore households in these neighborhoods lack of water supply infrastructure. The residents of Magdalena Contreras rely on water supply from municipal water trucks that fail to fulfill their daily water consumption. Moreover, the inconsistency in the schedule of these water trucks surpass water consumption for the residents compared to any average neighborhood in the Mexico City. As a result, the residents of this neighborhood actively practice water recycling strategies by reusing water from dishwasher to clean the house, or by reusing shower water in the toilet flush while awaiting the next water delivery to fill up their tinacos. The proposed self-built water infrastructure integrates the water recycling process on a larger scale to maintain water circulation within the settlement, thus creating a closed-loop water cycle system for water supply and consumption on a neighborhood level. The topographic conditions of these informal settlements on the foothill are suitable natural platforms to distribute water from higher to lower elevation. The system fits a cluster of 50 to 100 households by first collecting grey water from each house, transferring it into artificial wetland that treats the water through a biochar filtration system, and finally allowing the neighborhood to reuse grey water as a source of clean water supply through direct connection with existing plumbing facilities and the tinacos. Untreated grey water and rainwater are collected in a grey water tank before being delivered to an artificial wetland through the water pipes, while black water is collected from septic tank in each household or sent to the neighborhood septic tank, where the solid waste is finally collected by a municipal waste truck, and the liquid waste is delivered to the artificial wetland for further processing. Through this process, grey water collected from the higher elevation is filtered into clean water for use in the lower elevations. Greywater from the lowest level is pumped back to the water facilities at the top of the hill to close the cycle. The water treatment facilities at the highest elevation supply excess water from the system to recharge the groundwater in the conservation area with a porous landscape. The proposal of a closed-loop water cycle system provides relevance to water both as an input and output for the metabolism of the neighborhood. The proposed system of a new water infrastructure consisting of a central septic tank collector, artificial wetland, greywater tank, biochar filtration tank, and the clean water tank is deliberately designed on a steep streets without car accessibility, in turn following the logic of gravity. Above-ground water pipes and infrastructural intervention thus become a new object in the self-built environment of these informal settlements.
Mexico City has had an extensive saga with water sensitivity and finds itself at its brim with paradoxical water shortages and flooding disasters due to unnatural obtrusions. The four contributions address the specificities of supply and consumption pertaining to the water cycle. Through contemporary and vernacular solutions, the proposals provide alternate systematic shifts against the current centralized system of water distribution in Mexico City, identifying opportunities to balance the growing water demand. Now more than ever, self-contained solutions in different configurations of the urban fabric stand crucial, with a growing urgency to improve resilience from a potential water crisis.
All right, thank you, Jacqueline, Masha, Nishi, and Ryan for your contributions for our collective project. We now open the floor for discussion. If there are any first responses immediately. Or maybe, sorry. Just want to say hello to the new faces in our Zoom room. It's good to see you, have you back again. But please take the floor, Anders.
It's very good to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Just, I guess, to start the conversation, I really like sort of the optimism. Like, there's two things I'm interested in what's going on here. Like, in one train of thought is this sort of avoiding or really noticing the fact that, like, government won't fix the situation for Mexican people, right? So it's beginning a discussion of saying, how can we deal with this problem as a community, as social groups, etc. No? So there's this aspect of the projects that are sort of looking at ways in which people could deal with the conflict, right? I mean, in some cases more than the other. For example, the one in Tlatelolco reminded me a little bit of Torre David in Venezuela, and then the later projects that some people try to implement. I don't know if you all are familiar with that project, but it's this high rise in the middle of Caracas, which was abandoned, and then it was infiltrated by people, and they just took over the building. So this sort of unregulated community started to live in a high-rise building, and through the community started dealing with all the potential problems that living in an unfinished building, a high-rise, started generating, right? So things like paying people to bring 30 stories up your water tanks, right, for drinkable water. So it speaks a lot about, I guess the word is resilience, and like working as community with dealing with very intense and problematic conflicts that we have in Mexico, right? And the other one is just the mere fact of how well you are all evidencing the situation in which we are at, right? From these buildings like Tlatelolco to the fact of how difficult it is to pump water to the unregulated settlements, not only because of poor infrastructure in Mexico, but also poor maintenance to the infrastructure in Mexico. So yeah, I think those are the first thoughts that come to mind after seeing the presentations and reading a little bit about them.
Okay, well, congratulations on all your effort, students. The project seems really nice. As Andres, I'm really glad you talked about the government inefficiencies, but when I look at the projects, I actually feel that there are projects that need a lot of money to be made. For example, the last project, the one in the informal settlements, where the pipes bring the water down from the upper part of the settlements, this one, the pipe dream. It seems really interesting because I actually, and I think we all Mexicans do believe that one of the things we can actually do to avoid the water crisis is I'm sorry, let me find the word for this, to collect the water, the rainwater, right? Actually, last night we had a huge storm. We have been having huge storms, and all this water goes to waste and goes to the same place as the black waters. So this is a big opportunity in Mexico to take the rainwater and use it. But this infrastructure seems like super expensive. So I really find myself struggling with the idea that this might be a communal approach, because I'm pretty sure there's no money in the community to do that. So it is a government inefficiency problem, but nevertheless, most of the projects we see would need big funding or government funding to happen. So this is where I struggle with what to say about the projects. The one that actually made more sense to me was the Tlatelolco one.
May I interject, Natalia?
Of course, Salomon.
Into this, because I empathize with your point, right? Without a doubt. But I also think to maybe take the contrarian argument is that the ambition of many of these projects is also to think about the large scale and to set visions of how one can think differently about the situation, right? So it may be, even if it's just a fragment of something that is at a much larger scale, is to also maybe rethink the architectural imagination and how it is, let's say, conceived and appropriated by governmental or municipalities or by communities themselves, right? Is how do we set forward a set of speculations to reimagine what could potentially happen on the ground. So it's always, I believe it's always a kind of balance between what is really on the realities on the ground, as well as what kind of visions can be set forth to rethink certain circumstances. I mean, that's actually the privilege of being within a kind of academic context in reality, right? To imagine something different. I just throw it out there for conversation. I don't know what.
I think you're absolutely right. And I get that this is the point of an academic exercise. And in that sense, the work is great. I'm just, I think maybe it is in the big scope that I see the difficulties. There's actually a firm, I don't know the word for it, in Mexico that's called Isla Urbana, and they work with rainwater caption in a small scale in informal settlements. nevertheless, I get that the assignment was to think big and like challenge those sort of problems, which I think is great. And that's why in the one in Tlatelolco, I really see a lot of potential, because Tlatelolco is actually a community that's well organized, and it's a great place to experiment caption in a big scale, but at a still manageable scale. So this exercise, I think, is really good, and it really portrays something that could happen, because you have all that roofs on Tlatelolco that could be capturing that rainwater for all the people that live in there. I'm gonna let someone else speak. Thank you.
Well, maybe I can jump in now. Congratulations, I think it's a fantastic work in terms of, like set new vision, as Solomon was saying. I'm really glad to see how architecture can still build like new ways to imagine a city, no? How can we build like going down and up? There is this coincidence that I like. I don't know if it was like a group strategy, but I kind of find two groups and among the 4 projects that you are showing today. I find 2 groups. First, Talocan and Cuatro Culturas will be in one group for me, because they are like very punctual interventions. For example, Talocan, I imagine it as a line project, no? It goes with the strategy of the line. On the other side, Cuatro Culturas is more like a point, no? If we imagine like the city from above. And I like that the line goes under, and then the point, in this case being Cuatro Culturas, goes like up, no? That's very nice. And I like the idea of an inverted pyramid. And also, if you go up, there is this row, like in section in Talocan, where the water is going down, no? It's like a cascade going down all the way to the source or to the aquifer. And this case is for me like a new kind of urban space, no? Like a public space that is kind of being like ruled by water. So it's a really fascinating, like fantastic way of imagining the city. For the Cuatro Culturas is like Quicho Curucagua, no, comes and meets Mario Pani. So that's very funny for me. I cannot stop thinking of metabolism when I see like the form, no, that you are using to integrate these capsules, like water intelligence capsules, let's call it like that. So the image at the end of this one, no, and the one of like where the person is, the big section. So for me, it was like, I like that every project has this ironic way of visualizing architecture. Ironic is intelligence, but also it gives you like surprises. So I love that. And for the other part, the other group, it will be for me more surfaces, no? It's like you need a space in the horizontal like view in order to build. And also you have one that is going down. The first one that is the peripheries, no? That you start like to do excavations, no, on the ground. And it makes me think of like, like if you are building an archaeological site, no? Like we use like the origin of our culture, and of course it's had to do with the management of water, no, in a more natural way. So congratulations for that analogy. And the pipe dream, that's very funny. I think it will really work. I can totally imagine those pipes going all the way there. It's like if you are bringing the Pompidou, no, to this neighborhood. So yeah, congratulations of these ideas. And I would like to know if you had this strategy, like we go surfaces and we go up and we go down, or it was just a casualty.
Maybe for us, that was more like a cycle in all the projects that's constantly happening. So not the cycle just related to the water flow and not very much to do with the surface. So that's something new that you brought in today. So thank you for that. But yeah, the projects are organized in a way to see how they relate with each other in an order. Like, for example, the second relates to the third relates to the fourth. So something like that was intentional.
That's right. Yeah, but as you say now, Nishi, is water flows, no? And by thinking on that, you got to this project. So it's really fascinating in terms also of the brief, no? Like how water allowed the students to imagine new ways to build, no, a solution in terms of architecture. So congratulations to all of you.
And I think it also, oh, sorry, just something very quickly. I think the 4 projects very, very, very nicely describe 4 different situations of the water crisis in Mexico, right? So some dealing with topography, some dealing with getting the water up, some dealing with, like you mentioned, the point, no, in a single point, bringing it up and down. So I think it very clearly through 4 projects speaks a story about our relationship to water in Mexico City, no?
Yeah. Like put it there, like in a more systematic, no, and strong, let's say, intelligent way. No?
Yeah. I also like, I'm sorry if I keep interrupting somebody. just these last images, I wanted to talk a little bit about these drawings specifically, the very sketchy ones, because I think sometimes something that I find very strong in architectural representation is when the representation has some sort of communicative factor to the actual people you're dealing or speaking with, right? And I think in that sense, this comic kind of representation is very efficient because when you see how people, for example, in unregulated settlements, the access to the kind of information they get and that kind of information they more easily understand in order to do some technical work, it ends up having to do more with this less technical drawings and representations to situations. So I think these drawings also speak about the public that the project is addressing, right? Rather than maintaining it in a very academic and technical speech.
Yes, thank you. That was actually the intention, because it was important to see how the materiality of these community responds to the proposal that I'm sort of bringing forward. So to see how the scenography is being set up in these informal settlements was important to depict in a way.
I actually have a question, if I can intervene. There's something we have in Mexico City called vasos reguladores, like regulatory bases, where they capture water. I wanted to know if that came out in your research and if you know anything about the vasos reguladores. And also, you mentioned, like at the end of the video, that these interventions are supposed to be communal. So I was wondering how do you suppose to invite the community to join to these interventions in an ideal way? I know you're in Europe and we're in Mexico, and this is a difficult time for connection, but I had those questions.
Yeah. To answer, I think the first part, I wasn't aware of what you mentioned. The basins are the public basins. So I didn't refer to that. The second thing about the communal intervention is because if in this particular diagram, or maybe the section here, the first one shows that there's this water catchment where activities like washing clothes or just recreational spaces can be integrated within this channel of water catchment itself. So the people have that collected water to just go there and wash clothes or just sit around, and then it later also gets filtered, the rainwater, and it provides water to drinking water fountains in that particular area, which is the lowest point in the community. So in that sense, the whole system is just for one particular neighborhood or a community. So that's how it integrates.
Thank you.
There's, I don't know if, oh, sorry, go.
This question of collective use was addressed to this project or like general?
It was in general.
Oh, Yeah, we thought a lot about this, and many interventions are more prototypical. So it's like to start with one example that can, if it will be successful, that can be like a driver for people to continue this transformation or to join somehow. So here, for example, it can be like the process to reinforce the building. So it can be also like a reverse process, like if the city will somehow fix the current problem with water supply and pipe system. So it can be reversed in other way because all infrastructure are kept in the same place. So it's like just new layer of prototypes of this intervention. So it's also like some small decisions that can be implemented and then can again reverse to reverse this process back.
Thank you, Maria.
Hi guys, I do have some questions. I'm quite fascinated by some obvious contradictions in your projects, and I'd like to have some idea of how you envision the things. For the first project with the building in the whole, is it that when there is too much water, then the lower parts of that structure get flooded? So is it somehow that if it's successful, if that project's successful, it's actually bad for the things that are happening inside there? That's one question. Let me ask another two. The other thing, I guess for Marina, for the Tlatelolco, to look at that, I was wondering, for example, how much placing that huge water tank on the roof of what are arguably rather weak concrete structures would, if that is, first of all, something which you considered, and second, if in the case that the tank is not on top of the roof and it's on the ground, would that change the project? That's a question, right? And the third one I would like to ask regarding the third project that we saw with the Colonias Populares. I wonder there, for example, how are you thinking of having such a, let's say, fixed landscape, and somehow, as you mentioned, an undefined housing area, because of course the housing doesn't have a plan. So maybe those three questions, if you could briefly just answer.
Hi, can you hear me? So for the project itself, yes, it's supposed to be flooded. On the bottom level, there are a bunch of cisterns to collect the water when it does rain heavily, and then it forces the water into the first level of the aquifer, because the first aquifer is pretty much minimal at this point. They're already tapping into the second aquifer below. So this is kind of a way to recharge the first level of the aquifer and hold the water for the community as well. So when it does happen to be dry season, they can pump it back up and use it for the specific area. So it is meant to be flooded at this level, at the bottom level, for this particular reason.
Okay. For Conjunto Urbano, the first idea was to use water as reinforcement of the building. So the water can be a counterweight of building while earthquake. And such examples already happen in Taiwan and in America. And actually, there was idea to put somehow water catchment on the ground, but then we need a pumping station. And this is the problem to maintain this infrastructure. So that's why having a tank on the top, it's like can work without pressure, without additional infrastructure that need to be maintained.
And also this side support element can make it more possible, like half of weight is going for building to rebalance it, and these pillars, side pillars, support overweight of this water volumes.
And for the third part, so in these highly undefined settlements, the landscape intervention only basically follows one logic, which is to go from the higher point to the lower point so that the rainwater can be collected. So it finds its way in between the fabric of this informality of the settlements. So it's not a very fixed thing, but it just needs to follow this higher to lower contour logic. That's it. Maybe also something related to the first thing I think Natalia was mentioning earlier about how it's some of our projects deal with this expensive infrastructure. But the idea was to, of course, we cannot completely curb the reliance on these government water supply sources, right? So the idea for all of us was to find solutions in a communal scale or maybe self-reliant scale so that it provides this alternative source of water supply, because there are always these problems existing currently, at least in this government infrastructure. So how can we go beyond relying on just that source and add something more to these different fabrics that we're dealing with in the 4 projects?
I think it's really interesting that you look for alternatives of consumption of water supply. I think it would also be interesting to see this as an individual scale more than a community scale, because of course the aim is to do it in a communal way, because that way it will work better and you have more resources. But it's also hard to organize a big community, even if it's just one neighborhood. So maybe it's also a good move to look for an individual alternative, looking for, I don't know, a caption in your own roof or smaller alternatives. I get that was not the assignment though. But I think the 4 projects present really interesting alternatives. This one, the one where you acted in the south part of the city, Xochimilco, I think it's really interesting because that's also a part of the city that has actually a lot of water. And actually it has live canals. It has the Canal Nacional, it has the Xochimilco canals. So there are big places to absorb water and restore back to the aquifer, and also to contain it to use for different housing uses. So this is really interesting, and it's a part of the city that's in actual conflict right now. They're destroying one of our last wetlands in the city to build a street as we speak, because Viva Mexico. So this is absolutely a theme that should be addressed. So congratulations on that.
Actually, I want to respond to your statement about starting from an individual. Actually, this pipe dream is the idea is starting from the household itself, so they can reuse, because this informal settlement, I read it from some source that they reuse their own water because they have no water supply, so they reuse their own water from dishwasher to use it for toilets or something like that. But now we're thinking of using this a manual technique that they use and integrate it into their own house. But as far as we can go to treat water to use from washing dishes to toilet is possible in the household itself, but to reuse your gray water to be able to reuse it over and over again, you need more infrastructure. That's why it's going bigger than after that. But I think also in this problem is not only the problem of the community, like in this Magdalena Contreras, for example, but also for the whole Mexico City, because this is also a part of Mexico City that there is a lot of residents there. So I think for the funding, maybe the government should also able to start this project to give the water supply to the residents there.
Yeah, they should. Another thing that comes to my mind is maintenance of these projects, right? Because maintenance is a huge thing in Mexico. And I know as architects, we can't think about everything and we can't completely grasp everything. But I think it's another thing to consider when you're projecting in a Latin American city where the government is not really something you can count on. Maintenance is a big thing. So we maybe should be thinking about projects where the maintenance could be like self-done or is not really necessary. I don't know, just throwing out there to give something to the conversation.
I can quickly answer that. We're all like trying to make this water supply just by gravity. So actually it's like no need for specific infrastructure to be maintained. So it's like water that just go down. So maybe this is like a quick question because I think we very close to the end because of our schedule.
Yeah, everything works by gravity in the 4 projects, right? That's great.
Yeah. That was the question. We searched a lot of scientific information on how to make water to go down, to go up, because it's like all physical. I don't know how to say it's physical way of water. So it was very interesting.
Thank you very much, supply and consumption group. And I think that now it's time that we moved to waste, our final part of the water cycle. And also thank you to the guests. And I'd like to introduce our guests for the waste group, which is Chris Romanos and Heidi Son from TU Delft, and also Inge de Kraen from Aquafin in Flanders. Thank you very much for joining us. And we can start watching the video of Waste Group.
The water in Mexico City today flows from the surrounding volcanic ranges to the center, past the airport, through and around the mountain ranges on the north of the city to end up in Tula and Mezquital Valley. From the Aztec Empire and the separation of fresh and saline water surrounding Tenochtitlan to the Spaniards and their attempt to drain Lake Texcoco in order to control flooding, the issue of water management has always been vital for Mexico City. Nowadays, only a few remnants of the former Lake Texcoco persist throughout the year as rivers and canals funnel wastewater out of the valley. The Tula and Mezquital Valley is now a vast agricultural region irrigated by the wastewater of Mexico City. This relationship between wastewater and agriculture has existed since the time of Tenochtitlan, when the chinampas were invented and proliferated in an attempt to feed the city. In addition to the farmlands and the urban sprawl, nature reserves and airports are also entering the discussions around water in Mexico City as conservation and globalization manifest themselves spatially within the valley. Free architectural projects explore the intersection of wastewater and agricultural practices in the greater region of Mexico City through specific organizational structures. From the government to the cooperative, these three different organograms dictate Mexico City's future perspective on wastewater as both an input and output for the metropolitan metabolism. Even after leaving a wastewater treatment plant, the water feeding Xochimilco at the base of the mountain range needs to be cleaned once again to better preserve the historical landscape. By incorporating parts of a wastewater treatment plant with an unconventional source of waste, an experimental solution to heavy metal accumulation in the water and soil could be implemented systematically on a local scale.
The chinampas that define Xochimilco, a World Heritage Site, are kept together by stakes and willow trees, called ahuejotes. This establishes a soil bed for agriculture and the filtration apparatus for waste. As a grid-like pattern develops, the remaining lake in between becomes natural waterways, where the axolotl, an Aztec god known in the form of an adorable amphibian, lives. Now the region is reliant on water, containing heavy metals sourced from wastewater treatment plants. As a result, the tilapia and carp that were introduced as alternative food sources are no longer considered safe for consumption. With no native species to slow the tilapia, this fish and the water hyacinth that came with it dominate the aquatic life in these waterways. However, these alien species provide a new opportunity for water treatment. Water hyacinths can rapidly absorb heavy metals due to their aggressive growth rate. As it accumulates most in the roots of a plant, by removing this part before using the tops as fertilizers, the soil and water can immediately be improved. Starting from this labor-intensive method, new experimental ones can later be introduced. Electrokinetics phytoremediation takes advantage of this natural process by increasing the absorption rate of the heavy metals with an electrical current around the plant. If successful, the ahuejotes would no longer just bind and protect the individual chinampa, and instead become pillars of water quality for the whole of Mexico City. The electricity can be generated within the system by introducing a biogas digester. This fish digester would promote the catching of tilapia and carp to be turned into biogas and fish emulsion. This organic fertilizer can be used in the chinampas as well as the greenhouses and nurseries to mitigate the use of agrochemicals that contain heavy metals. Most importantly, the fish digester will promote the return of fishermen to the waterways. With their help, the biodiversity in Xochimilco, Tláhuac, and Milpa Alta would improve through their management of the tilapia and carp population. Then as the waters become clear and the axolotl population recovers, even they could return to their original status as food sources. The stabilization of all species reliant on the chinampas sprouting from the ahuejotes.
Right next to the city, where the remains of Texcoco Lake is a site for all kinds of project proposals, ranging from nature reserves to technological marvels and combinations of both. One such proposal was the Churubusco Lagoon, a water purification technology that used naturally occurring phenomena in rivers and lakes. Following the cancelled airport, a new project is proposed to introduce the lake to the city, starting with toilets in hand. Combining the useful with the beautiful, allotment gardens provide healthy physical activity while offering organized members the pleasure of experiencing the garden and the production of food. Going beyond merely recreational, Sociedad Holística y Tecnológica aims to offer an alternative model for urban development and land reclamation in which modern citizens can take part in sustenance farming and the process of land reclamation. Following the cancelled airport and building upon the current plans for a recreational park, a land reclamation project is proposed. By experimenting with traditional agricultural practices and directly participating in a largely enclosed waste and water cycle, members slowly transform this former site of Texcoco Airport while nourishing themselves both physically and spiritually. From producing and fertilizing to consuming and composting, organic matter is accumulated to enrich soil and improve the water retention of the site. Central to this development is the Reimagined Toilet unit, challenging members to rethink the way in which they use the toilet. While behavioral adjustments might take some effort, human bodies already separate urine from manure by default. Collecting waste separately requires less processing, produces less smell, and attracts less pests, while allowing it to be composted and percolated directly. From simple low-tech buckets for footloose individuals to sophisticated high-tech drones for established communities, the new toilet can be constructed and used regardless of income level, user volume, pre-existing infrastructure, or site. Today, the site exists on a variety of topologies, presenting plots for a range of new members. Most of the terrain is vacant, ready to accept new Chinampa developments. Elsewhere, Texcoco Airport is partially constructed, and the existing airfield has been graded with tezontle and concrete. In this area, the airport's foundations are in place together with hyperboloid structures. For these parcels, partners and tenants are sought out to be part of a research and innovation center for gardening and composting. By embracing its liquid infrastructure, Mexico City is to expand without negatively impacting its natural resources. As part of the metabolic functioning of the metropolis, Mexico City's wastewater is expelled to the Mezquital Valley, used to irrigate the crops that return to the city in the form of food. The valley's farmers and communities are economically dependent on sewage, a resource that both creates wealth and diseases.
As a Totonilco wastewater treatment plant is able to treat only the 70% of the wastewater coming from the city, the contribution proposes a decentralized strategy to treat the remaining 17 cubic meters per second, ensuring a balance between health, agriculture, and landscape through 5 statements. Number 1. Scattered through the 3 irrigation districts of the Mezquital Valley, 7 infrastructural rings connected to the valley drainage system composed of dams and rivers treat the wastewater which is used for irrigation and then is filtered back into the aquifer. Number 2. The configuration of the valley, composed of hills, plains, towns, and rivers, suggests a radial geometry as a solution that works in 2 directions. While the ring cleans the water from inside to outside, the centrifugal shaft adapts to the context. Number 3. The main program of the wastewater cooperative are 6,000 hectares of wetlands necessary to purify water in the existing territory without altering it. However, biomass plants, logistics centers, and worker facilities are the adjoining programs fundamental for an optimal relation between water, food, and energy. Number 4. As part of the existing ejidos, the radial grid combines the minimum size of the hectare with the linear system of water purification to configure the width of the ring. While the first stage of the cleaning process provides water to irrigate the interior formed by drought-tolerant crops, the second stage provides water for the exterior formed by water-extensive crops. Number 5. With an ideology based on the organic vision coined by the 19th century social thinkers, the project turns waste into an agent of regeneration, creating a new social order to transform our anthropocentric society.
The transformation of a city's attitude towards wastewater is an ongoing process that has always been closely tied to politics and culture. From ancient techniques of water separation and drainage to water collection in the Mezquital Valley nowadays, adjustments to the wastewater organizational structure prepare the ground for individuals to re-examine what they leave behind. When it comes to wastewater, there is no consistency. It can be nourishing, toxic, or simply smelly. Identifying these differences and treating them accordingly is vital for the agriculture that supports a city. Landscapes, buildings, and objects all facilitate a new perspective on wastewater within the water cycle. If wastewater is not properly managed, not only is the supply jeopardized, but more significantly, the current health of a city is in danger, as the food that cycles more rapidly enacts its revenge.
Thank you, Michael, Jean, and Anna. And I would like to open up the floor for the conversation, questions or comments.
I don't know if I can ask a question or.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Okay, yeah, it's a very interesting project, and I'm really glad to be here. But I was thinking about the fish digester. And you like to evacuate the heavy metals from the water, but how will you stop the ongoing release of wastewater in this water? Will there be enough carbs and tilapia? Probably it take a long time before all wastewater is gone. I think on a moment there will be no carbs and tilapia left to generate energy you need for this methods.
Yeah, so I think that kind of complete removal of the introduction of heavy water into the water supply needs to come from almost like a policy level that addresses the issue in all industries and just a way of life in a city. And this is just a way to kind of reduce the impacts, to kind of minimize the concentrations of it through the process of not actually the fish digester itself, but these possibility with these electrified soil that promotes the absorption of it into the trees that are present in the chinampas, whereas the fish digester is just that's a more of a method to power it, as well as kind of bring the biodiversity in the water back by addressing the issue of invasive species as well.
Okay.
If I can jump in right there, I think you're mentioning something very important, Jean, and that is it's not really coming through in the presentation, I believe, which is the encounter, almost the clash of the endemic. So species that are particular from that ecosystem, in fact, found nowhere else in the world, and the presence of very aggressive exotic species. And tilapia and carp in Xochimilco are precisely that. So of course it's interesting to see how that presence of a aggressive exotic species can be controlled by a third element or a third component, which is the human, right? So if you think of these exotic species that have been introduced in the beginning to increase, let's say, the economic activities of the local populations of Xochimilcan, and the effect that it had on environmental, the environmental impact it has had, that came out of pure ignorance, really. It was not malintention. Yet, by reintroducing the agency of the human, right, I think your project is interesting in the sense that the Xochimilcas, as you know, are also endemic of that space, right? So that humans again, and not only humans, but Xochimilcas become engaged in extracting the tilapias, I think is an interesting idea. Now, this is a comment, I guess, that goes for all three projects, is the question of the viability and the, as Mexicans, I think we're all a little bit cynical because we have had the direct experience of how an environment is mistreated, is mismanaged, is neglected over and over again. And not only because we're bad people or so, it has also to do with the enormous scale of it, right? So this is a question, I think, for all three of you. Let's say that you go to Mexico City and you present one of these projects to the local population and the local government. How would you explain how your projects, all three of them, encounter reality? How are these viable? Is it possible? Do they have some kind of a problem of realization, right? Or do they stay in this utopian possibility or spaces of possibility of what is perhaps desirable yet not possible in this important project? And then finally, because then I will put my microphone on mute, The last comment I wanted to make is for all three projects, I've heard all three of you talking about the value of Mexico, and that's a gross, pretty bad problem. It's not a valley, it's an endorheic basin, and that completely determines your entire situation of waste to be pumped out and water to be pumped in, right? That is an important geomorphological aspect of this very particular environment. So the question, I guess, of the utopian, this utopian impulse and the spaces of possibility that all three projects are touching upon is what I would like to discuss this with the students.
Yeah, sure. I could start. I think that one possible way of approaching or explaining how would be these projects taking place in Mexico would be like to demonstrate that small scale experimentations related to this huge scale, that this scale of course is related to waste, waste being expelled to the Tula Valley, Mezquital Valley. I hope it's correct now. The Mezquital Valley is the good word. It's something that needs to be considered in the very big scale and also in the very small scale. So at least in the project, the wastewater cooperative, when researching about how wetlands could purify water in Mexico, one of the first things that were done was to check that already people are doing it in Mexico, with a small prototypical scale projects related to communities. So I think that this could be one way of approaching an explanation, like not only saying this already is happening or is a possibility, but also trying to explain the projects relating different scales.
I think that's a really good comment in relation to the scale and the scalelessness of these approaches, or at least these intervention proposals. It's the minor technicities that people have used in these, let's say, in these environments for over 2,000 years that actually work, right? So I guess that's what I wanted you to say, Anna. But I'm wondering if Jean, for instance, because Xochimilco is a very interesting case because it's also a protected environment from UNESCO. It's a World Heritage Site. So there's very little you can actually do there. There are very many, like I think that the idea that you have is quite has potential, but there are a lot of how can I say restrictions, because this is an environmental site that is protected as a historical site. So there's very little you can actually do there, and that's part of why it is becoming so polluted. And so what is the reality of your case, Jim? How do you think you would convince?
Yeah, I think part of my project is trying to bring that issue into discussion as well. Like I was trying to place it within Xochimilco, and where if you want to do something with it, it has to be outside of it, but it's something that would be most beneficial there. And maybe this approach to completely limiting any type of kind of experimentation in these places is detrimental to in actually like preserving and making sure that this heritage lasts throughout into the future. And I think one part about the reality of my project, it relies on whether or not this technology of electrophytoremediation is even like feasible, or if it's the right method, if there is any, like actually it could be worse for this environment by introducing it. But it does need to be tested out. And I think that could be an individual, maybe some engineering student goes out and tries it out. And if that is successful, I think that sets a kind of precedent for it to be scaled up, and then the introduction of the fish digester could become a possibility. Whereas really until that proves to be beneficial, wouldn't address the issue of the heavy metals, although maybe the issue of the invasive species might still be something that's in consideration for that aspect of the project.
If I can say something, because I was triggered by, so with Ines' point about the tilapia at some point sort of running out. I think actually it's an interesting question with regards to all three projects, that they take as a base a kind of explicit, let's say, a problem, which then instead of immediately trying to kind of undo the problem, they sort of activate it in order to make it become productive in a sort of roundabout way. And I was thinking, especially, so in Jean's case, it's sort of clear, right? It's like what you have the invasive species, what is the kind of, you know, the kind of, to understand it as something that needs to be digested by the body. But same thing with Michael's Texcoco airport, you could say that this pattern of occupation, this kind of idea that there is a virgin territory, apart from the fact that they started to build the airport there, you know, can be sort of settled, not just in the way like the illegal settlements, but with another sort of paradigm. So it's to turn a problem that exists or a behavior that exists into something potentially productive. And then explicitly, I would say with Anna's kind of the kind of Ejido Landis project, you could say that already the situation there is the one where the waste problem of Mexico City is turned into an advantage, right? Because they have very high yields agriculturally. And yes, it's too bad that there is too many metals in it. But let's say there is a kind of a different relationship to the problem. It's like, okay, there is this thing, there's this environmental disaster, and it's like how to activate it somehow on and see where you end up on longer term. And you could say it's almost in the tradition of this El Caracol north of Texcoco, where they tried all these different things, you know, the water was too saline and to kind of exploit the problem, literally. And I think it's maybe beyond, let's say, the kind of organizatorio or organigram like relationship between the three projects, that they all need, you know, all three projects, you need to found some kind of new company to do it. It's also, I would say it's beyond that. It's this relation to the environmental problem, not something to solve, but to exploit. And while doing that, it's maybe also solved.
Yeah, I was saving this comment for the end discussion on that, because there were two things that really struck me from these projects and the approach to it. The first one is, as you say, it was it's I think a very clear view and almost a critique to this solutionism that we have. Okay, we see a problem, then we solve it, voila. And this is how Mexico has gotten into all the problems that we're dealing with. There's actually the working with the solution as a point of departure is actually where the problem really starts. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Filip, because that's an important thing. And the other is, of course, the difference between technicity and technology. So you're all dealing with technologies, or actually technicities, a form of technology that is 2,000 or 2,500 years old, and that has been adapted and adapting to the environment, and at the same time, in a way also changing, modifying, transforming the environment in a way that well, I think you guys have all kind of understood the main problematic. Yeah. But you definitely have to make sure that as soon as you can travel, you go to Mexico and you take one of these little boat trips through Xochimilco and understand what you're really dealing with. It's very different, I think, once you see it or you experience it in reality.
It's like Heidi says, maybe it's more something for the end discussion, but I think it's particularly relevant for these waste projects. Is like none of them, they all somehow deal with a landscape, right? It's a kind of clear, the ground on which they work, essentially, it's a landscape, be it Xochimilco, the Texcoco lake bed, or the Tula Valley, Mezquitao Tula Valley. And none of them sort of falls in the trap of a restoration. So yet I agree with Heidi, yes, there is this weight of the primordial in, you know, of these ancient technologies and etc. But none of the projects sort of wants to, you know, relates to the landscape as something to be restored. No, something is kind of, that problem is creating a new one. And I think that's I think powerful, you know, that there is no qualms about it, you know, let's make it one giant Xochimilco, right? It's like, even Xochimilco is not really Xochimilco, right? So there is always a kind of new landscape formed. I think that's strong, because it's something that, I mean, most landscapes projects sort of legitimize themselves by somehow being, you know, restoring something that should, it's almost like as if something should have been there instead of what is really there. So I think that's an important, in my opinion.
Yeah, if I may, maybe one of the reasons why I did what I, well, the part of the contribution that I made is that the current situation is one where, sure, the Texaco airport has been canceled, but what they propose instead is this very utopian, pretty, well, recreational park, right? And I don't know, 16 baseball fields and 24 football fields. And yeah, personally, I'm a bit skeptical as well, in the sense that how realistic is it? Well, it just needs another politician to cancel that project, right? It's so how realistic is that? And starting with something smaller, or something which could start with a very well, cheap and individual-based solution. You can do small steps while staying a bit, let's say, more agile in the great scheme of things.
And in a certain way, what I like about the toilet project really is the small scale in scale, but also in temporality. So obviously, this is a very, very controversial project, the lake recovery projects. They have been around for at least 40 or 50 years. So this, in my lifetime, I have seen 5 or 6 of these projects. But the matter that you're bringing this in as something that is temporal. It's not solving the problem. It's not. It's just kind of addressing an issue that raises awareness on how this environment actually is constantly kind of folding and unfolding in its conditions. So I thought this was a kind of a delicate, sophisticated project of toilets. I thought it was very interesting. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Chris, do you have something to add? Or
I'm asking Filip to explain that to me, because I didn't understand it. So I'm just trying to catch up a little bit with some of the ideas. I guess I think what I was thinking about whilst all you guys were talking was that indeed the scale of dealing, the scales at which you deal with, then I was asking myself, okay, those are big scales. Do you really need such big answers? And then I was thinking, for example, about those rings around the volcanoes. How many of those rings would actually, how many do you need? What do you need for all of them? I mean, what is the, how do you, as the designer, as the person responsible for putting these ideas on paper and then convincing other people that these ideas are very cool and important and critical to something, how do you convince, where do you find yourself, how do you find yourself dealing with the limits of your own design as you see your proposal kind of being sort of manifesting on paper? So you have a ring, yeah, very nice, yeah, very clear. But do you need the, how big is that? I mean, what's the actual, is it circumference?
yeah, the scale and the amount of rings that were necessary
also
for this
was I would ask you as well, how big, why do you, how much of the lake do you need to deal with in this situation? And how much you need to deal with, how much you need to produce, I think it's, to me at least, they're vital questions of design. And I wonder how you deal with it.
I would say that this was part of both projects because it was one of the first questions also. And we were calculating the hectares for mine, the number of rings, the importance of dealing with the minimal unit, the ring, and the composition of the rings. Also, if you want to go by phases. So I think that for both the airport and the wastewater cooperative, numbers and capacity of the landscape was really calculated, at least to be aware of what were we doing.
Can I say something?
Was part of the process.
Anna, to react to Chris's point, I mean, let's be honest, what you found out is that you don't have enough wastewater, you know? So actually you found a situation where the desire of kind of a land distribution project somehow, or let's say, you know, a land reclamation project, what was it? The part of your ring that could actually treat,
yeah.
You know, so you would have loved more waste, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So which is what I meant with the kind of inversion of the problem, because you had some kind of idea. Okay, let's fix the agriculture here. How much do I need to clean? Oh my God, I only have this amount of. And the fact that the rings started to multiply was in a way to kind of differentiate, you know, to have more intake points.
Yeah,
along the Tula, right?
Also to deal with this idea of the decentralization that we are, all of us or many of us are dealing also again with this idea of if a Totonilco is one thing and it's not working and it's all centralized, we need to have many.
Right.
Yeah. I was also wondering if.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
If you don't create, yes, well, it's the same thing. But I was also wondering that you don't you create new points of contamination. I think in bare landscape areas. How this rings will they not be high concentration of contamination? My English is not so good.
It's the, as opposed to kind of diluting. I think maybe it's important to know that particular area Anna works in, it already uses, let's say, the not treated waste. Mm-hmm. So I would say
yes.
What would you say, Anna? What would be the difference? The current situation would dilute the non-treated waste over a kind of more spread out, while you, in a sense, concentrated and treated in these rings.
I mean, these systems are connected to the dams that are full of wastewater that then nowadays irrigate the landscape. So these rings are a way of treating the waste before they irrigate the landscape with natural solutions.
There's several precedents. I mean, I know these are, I mean, in my lifetime, I have seen things as crazy as we will make an enormous hole in one of the volcanoes so that the, polluted air can go through. So in Mexico, the scale of the solutions are never scare us. We were willing to do anything no matter what. The more pharaonic and humongous, perhaps even better. But one of the things that I really like about these concentric settlements, if you like, it's not only about humans and what humans can do and so on. It is also how the idea of a concentric concentric pattern also what I understand from this is that it is able to sprawl and spread and control. And there are many precedents in the world about this. Here in the Netherlands, one of the ways to purify water is precisely to throw it into this kind of a marshland where the sand in the subsoil actually cleans it from the aquifers. In this case, I think one of the selling points for these concentric rings, if you like, of slow waste water management is that our vegetables and fruit could be eaten without being completely deadly. I mean, you try to eat a strawberry in Mexico without not only washing it, but disinfecting it, and you would have like salmonellosis if you're lucky, and otherwise you would probably die. So we would never put anything in our mouth unless we want to, risk our health. So in these kind of purifying rings, I thought that there is a lot of potential, but it has been tested in some parts of the world. These kind of crazy, enormous infrastructures, so let's call them like environmental structures, have been tested, and they actually work. So I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting approach to it. I don't know if it's feasible. Right, at all, especially the political landscape is incredibly difficult in that area. This is run by the the oligarchs, this whole area. So that's going to be very, very difficult and tough. But I mean, that's how Mexicans go big or go home, right?
Thank you very much for the really nice conversation, and maybe this is a really nice way to wrap up our presentation today in general.
Thank you.
We will have 10 minutes break for now. After that, we will have a wrap up at 5:30. Can
I ask the three of you, Anna and the tilapia and the terminal, if you could send me some kind of a document or something to read it, because it's very nice to see your 10-minute presentations or so, but I would like to know what else you have done, right? If you feel like it's relevant, I'd like to have a look at it.
Will. Thank you.
Super. Thanks.
Okay, goodbye. And good luck further on.
All right, welcome back. Let's get started again for the final discussion across all three chapters. Yeah, I'll just get started. We're joined by Heidi and Chris for this purpose, because Heidi from the remote situation kind of overview of the three chapters, and also participated at the earlier stage in your inquiries during our sort of ersatz fieldwork week as a kind of because of obviously the fact that we did not go to Mexico City, which by itself maybe is one aspect to reflect on, and also by Chris, who also contributed to one of our ersatz fieldwork weeks, and also has seen today all the work across the three chapters, and also actually the physical, let's say the printed material, the exhibition in school right now, which you can also see in the background of some of the participants. I think maybe as a structure for the discussion, maybe trying to find some kind of way to address to what extent the projects now do they, I was wondering, as a kind of first question, to what extent they kind of confirm these preliminary categories that we sort of came up with, right? Or came up with, it's like we used to structure our inquiry. The aquifer as a kind of category, the supply consumption, and the waste one, which obviously, so I don't know to what extent we know now more because of these projects, that, you know, to what extent these categories make sense, helpful, or, you know, should be challenged. I remember the question, or finding at some point an article where even the idea of the water cycle was challenged, because it would kind of create too much. It would basically, the water cycle, rather than representing the reality, this kind of typical image of the territory and the water cycle through, it would create a false sense of plenitude, right? Because it's this idea of the cycle, while in a sense, the point is that the water cycle is sort of damaged, or whatever. Yeah, so maybe that's one question to start. Another one would be, I think, for each separate category to kind of find, you know, more thematically how, rather than just solving something, they kind of, I think we did it already with the last chapter, you know, there is some kind of common understanding of that particular problem. And then also, I hope with Heidi here, we get to talk about axolotl at some point, but maybe that can be at the end of the discussion. All right, somebody.
I'm a bit worried that I might just take your, look at it, my favorite isn't there. that I take over the microphone. So if I do too much, just shut me up. For the first, I think a very important thing that also jumps through in the at least in the project representations in the videos, is this question of the cycle, right? This is a very 19th century, perhaps even earlier, understanding of perhaps as the city or environments as analogies, perhaps, if not metaphors, for the living organism, right? And this creates all kinds of problems, not in the good sense, but in problems of, let's say, of a myopic understanding of what we're really dealing with in a very big, complex, let's say, entities such as a city or any other, let's say, living environment. So that's, I think, a very good observation that Filip brings forward, because I hear a lot of cycles and I heard a lot of structures, but I kept on wondering when are they going to deal with the problem of, let's say, system theory? So what is an open system? What is a closed system? How do these different systems interact, molest each other, at some point clash, and then perhaps produce other emergent properties or emergent systems? And especially how complexity theory works in relation to that. So in a way, it's a step perhaps up into the abstraction of what you see on the physical aspects, on the spatial aspects of the environment. But this clash between the ideas, 19th century ideas of cycles as a metabolic metaphor, systems and complexity theory, which I think is really, really important to understand and approach, and perhaps even deal with issues and entities like Mexico City. And perhaps further even is how to bring these ideas of systems and complexity theories into an understanding of assemblages, because that I would tie this idea of an assemblage of heterogeneous elements from the little axolotl that sometimes comes in the screen to this enormous understanding of geomorphology, right? So these really, really enormously diverting scales, perhaps even life forms, as tied into an assemblage that can be both productive and unproductive. And in Mexico, and let's say in the city of Mexico, we have both. We have the intermingling of these complex systems in assemblages that are very productive. In other words, life is possible because of these assemblages somehow. And also very unproductive assemblages. I mean, one of the problems we have is the not understanding the environment that we inhabit and that we modify with our actions, right? So this environmental technicity that borrows a lot from the 19th century ideas of infrastructure cycles and so on. And this other kind of intuitive understanding of what the Nahuas and the Aztecs did in their environment, which was to inhabit the environment while using technicities that help them to survive while, helping the environment itself to work as an assemblage. So I think these two kinds of really, they're very, very related. And obviously your projects, all of them touched the problem of transdisciplinarity, right? So that's another point in case where Filip's comment about how your projects actually highlight and underline the question of problematization and what is wrong with always trying to solve problems as a transversal approach. So, transdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary endeavors, collectives of people from different disciplines and different areas of specialization, they hardly ever want to solve a problem. They want to see what they share in common in order to tackle and answer certain questions rather than solve a problem. So I think from the toilet to the waste to the aquifer, these are really interesting moments where transversal assemblage actually makes these entities come through. So the third point that Filip you raised, I actually only wrote 3. So I don't know what the third point was, but this is my intervention.
The axolotl, or no?
Yes, that is material for an entirely different lecture. But yeah, if you encounter that little animal, it's just magic. It's a magic creature. It's very incredible. But if there's some space, if there's a little time later, I'll go a little bit and explain what the axolotl does for science. But I also want to give some space to the others.
Thank you, Heidi, for mentioning the word transdisciplinarity. I mean, one of the questions you posed earlier was if you were to present these projects in Mexico City to the government or the municipality, how would you tackle that? I was thinking, like, if we were to go to Mexico City, who would indeed be the interesting people to talk to? Would this indeed be people from the government or from the municipality, or I don't know, would that be people who are a part of certain communities or farmers or work in the agricultural sector? So that's a question I was asking myself earlier. So I think that I don't know, that dovetails quite nicely with this idea of transdisciplinarity, because I do think all these projects show that they're quite big and fast, and they don't implicate like a small group of individuals, but it relates to a large territory, to people.
and harness the ability to change, because I think in all the projects, it's these categories, the thematic categories, are really all of them very prone to change and difference. So from aquifer, different levels of how the aquifer feels and how it empties, how it transforms water into mud, for instance, how that has an impact on whatever you construct, how infrastructure is seen. So these are all very dynamic categories. From we tend to think of them as discrete things that are sitting there, but in reality, they are the result of everlasting and continuous changes. So if you think of who would you need to talk to in order for one of these, let's say, one of these projects to be considered, I wouldn't say even implemented, right? To be considered, it is exactly that, is to understand it as a dynamic, complex, open system. So you would start thinking from the environment up, I would guess, and that would I think be worthwhile for this project or these projects, and in general for all projects in the 21st century that deal with these more more complex environmental issues and ecological questions, without exclusively or explicitly referring to it as nature versus the culture aspect. So who do you start with? Well, obviously we have to talk to each other, but then you have to also convince the axolotl that that is actually the best environment for it, and that your intentions are actually not to preserve it as a species, but to return it to its natural habitat, right? So these are all very interesting kind of layers, domains that that these projects touch upon almost poetically and representationally in a way. But yeah, there's plenty of, I think there's like an onion to peel, I think. Just taking advantage of the silence, you said, well, if we go to Mexico, no, say when we go to Mexico, when, because Mexico is open, you can go now, right? So go, really go. It's a very interesting place to see, and try to go.
Problem is coming back after Heidi.
But see, who's putting the taxolotl up and down the screen here?
It goes by itself.
Oh, it's wonderful. No, but it's interesting for you guys to see it perhaps in December, to be in December where the dry season is there. So Anna, you would be shocked to see how your waste is actually more solid than liquid, right? And then see in the rainy season how that turns all into, it liquefies. It's an aquatic environment, so it's a marshland and the Lake Basin. So your waste would be actually liquid. That's why agriculture grows so nicely in the Mezquital Valley.
I give the word to Chris for a second.
For a second. I think it's, so I want to get back to, I mean, the key thing that I detect in how you all approach the projects is obviously that you're dealing to some extent, some of you more than others, with engineering, okay? And I think it's having worked on engineering projects myself, I would tell you, I always have this question in my mind, what am I doing here? Helping to design an engineering project. My background is in whatever it is, architecture, whatever that means. And so when I see your projects, I do wonder how you yourselves have, if you have encountered this question, so what am I designing here from my point of view, my knowledge? What am I designing in an engineering project? Because you don't have to see it as an engineering project. You can see it as something else. But that's how I would see myself in that. And when you ask yourself that question, how do you define what the limits are of what you are doing? Anybody can answer.
Well, I'm sure it varies for each of us individually, and say for myself, I think it's bringing some kind of boundary to the limits of what we think is possible, but while still not being completely confined by it, as it's not our discipline. Because you can do something completely fantastical and it looks great, it sounds great in your head, but then if it's completely ungrounded, then it's also not so, I guess, other than bringing an issue into discussion, there's also like no potential for it to be received by this culture that it is so much about solving a problem, to kind of bring that and change their perspective on things. I think there needs to be some level of kind of possibility.
If I can react to what Chris's point, I think it already came up with the last, or explicitly with, well, both in the first group and then in the last group, so the aquifer first and the waste after. I think yes, it's kind of on a disciplinary level, engineering as a kind of category, which in a sense is universal. But I would also say it's within a kind of particular context where I think remembering watching together the H2O CDMX documentary where about injection wells, that kind of predicament that yes, you can recharge the aquifer, yes, it takes 100 years, yes, you have to, in the particular lake bed sediment ground, you have to, or whatever is beneath it, you have to make your water almost as so clean that it's almost drinkable. So why would you inject it back in the aquifer if you just created very precious drinkable water? So that's not just the engineering, but it's the way it's combined with a sort of economical paradigm of why to have, you know, machinery and fix the problem in this sort of mechanistic way. And I feel what is striking, I think, as a particular context is that the engineering is not so much it's not so much a kind of total. Heidi mentioned the endoric basin. You could say it's the idea in isolation, right? You could theoretically say, since it's sort of enclosed, theoretically, of course, it no longer is, but you would say it would be the idea of, like in the Netherlands, you know, it's the engineeredness desires for it to be a total piece of engineering, right? It's not like a landscape in which you do engineering. And I think that's the main thing here. The engineering is bits and pieces which often compete with each other, right? So it's not an assembly of things that necessarily collaborate, but it's different experiments that enter in competition, all with the horizon, of course, the same problems, and act upon that very particular landscape. So for me, I would say that even challenges the more kind of universal question about what are we doing attached to a kind of engineering problem. It's also an engineering problem in this kind of context where it's not from, let's say, a kind of synthetic point of view, but you know, different competing interventions within the same landscape. And to just last point about this, because maybe to make it more concrete, I think it goes back to Chris's question or point about the waste one, about what is somehow the quantification or the perimeter of these projects. Like, how do you decide the scale when it becomes the project? You know, for Anna, how many rings? For Michael, what's the perimeter of this new allotment landscape, whatever you want to call it? For Jean, the same thing. You know, what's the area to kind of turn into the Xochimilco again, right? And I think the question of the perimeter there is always in a kind of dialogue with the quantification, right? So Anna's has no perimeter, right? It's this kind of space in which, well, there is one, but it's not part of the project. So it's a kind of multiplication of this intervention. While in the case of Michael, it's a given perimeter only for the fact that it's the abandoned airport landscape. But that one is not literally it's not exactly the same perimeter as the unbuilt part of, let's say, the Lake Texcoco lake bed. So the question of the perimeter, in a sense, becomes the project. While, of course, in the case of Jean, the perimeter is whatever UNESCO decided it to be, which is of course not taking into account a lot of other parameters than the landscape that happens to look like Xochimilco. So I think there the role of the fact of checking to what extent a given or invented or challenged perimeter, how this relates to this quantification of what you want to do with it. You know, how much landscape do you need to have enough compost produced to reclaim the land, as in Michael's project about Lake Texcoco. With Anna, how much waste, right? So there is a kind of a proportional relationship or a question. All of a sudden, these problems, which are absolute, get a kind of territorial dimension because it's through the way of activating part of the landscape to respond to it. And already this relationship of perimeter and let's say the size of the problem, I find that kind of interesting. Yeah, I find it a kind of interesting problem, and it's something evident in the waste part, but I'm sure relevant for the other chapters too. Although maybe not so much in plan there, maybe more in section. I don't know.
How I see that, I mean, I see exactly what you're saying, but not in the measurable, extensive kind of you know, hectares or square kilometers or whatever, like more like not in the metric, like geographically metric type of limits and perimeters, but also going back to Chris, his comment about how engineering actually interprets or is involved in the transformation of this environment. It is on the perimeters or on the limits where a practice changes, and that I mean from engineering to agriculture. It's where that threshold, and I won't say only in the scales or in the nature of the extensive part, but also in the intensive aspects of it, when a practice moves from being, let's say, in this case, a scientific discipline to becoming a more practice-based craft, perhaps, right? So these, I think, very intriguing kind of hybrid understandings of the royal sciences as the continental philosophers call them, you know, engineering and life science and so on, how these become really minor practices, how from the toilet to the tilapia, how you really depend on the practice aspect of your let's say engineering or scientific vision for it to have any impact on the environment, right? To have a transformative potential. So I think that's super important that you guys think of this. You probably couldn't have gotten a more complex environment than what you got yourselves into. So really seeing these disciplinary limits, perhaps the perimeter of your sites are also the perimeters of the different disciplines that are somehow in a cacophony and need some way to be articulated in a way that can produce both the knowledge that you need, the engineering and so on, but also the practices to sustain this. Whether we like it or not, these are like great, but you need the social element, the collective element to transform this landscape into an actual milieu, an environment. That's a technological question. You know, that's really a technical question.
If I can interject here, because to sort of piggyback or digress slightly from Chris's commentary, I'd like to have a comment in hindsight, even though I know it's a bit fresh, about the kind of idea of a collective project. So in essence, the beginning of the semester started with a kind of sampling of various materials to create a lexicon, that then framed itself, well, we had to negotiate what the work would be, right? So now in retrospect, at least the idea of the organization of these 3 panel sessions, if we can call them like that, or proceedings, was to also, let's say, ex post facto, make a collective project in the end, or summation, where there would be 10 different contributions to tackle well, larger, that would problematize a larger set of conditions. So, I mean, I would like to hear, yeah, some reflections on that from you guys. At least Michael, who's always outspoken, do you have a comment on this?
Thanks, Solomon. I guess dealing with this as a group project, let's say the instrument of seeing it as a water cycle, or this animated GIF, which is somewhere on the website, which rotates from. Well, even though Heidi just as you said, it's always productive or maybe good to look at the water cycle as a cycle, but I guess in the context of this project, it really helped, let's say, put into place where our projects exist amongst each other. And then in this way also we could find or identify quite clearly what were the blanks or let's say the overlooked areas which needed more, or exactly the opposite, the places that there was too much focus on. So in this sense, we also use it as a way to kind of divide our interests and to divide our workforce to hopefully make something substantial as a group. So I think that's an initial reaction or initial thought I had when we posed this question, Solomon. I don't know, maybe someone else who has had different thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I personally really liked how did we incorporate all the information related to the atlases and maps in this last part, talking about contributions on architectural projects, but still going back to the work of others and taking all that information again to rephrase the architectural contributions. So this idea of having small introductions in each of the sections, aquifer, consumption, supply, and waste, related to the maps, to the atlas, then to introduce the projects was quite successful, in my opinion.
I kind of see from, sorry, Salomon, because you're somewhere in the bottom. Oh yeah. If I may just quickly, what I see is these 10 projects work as units, right? So each one can stand on its own by itself. It has its own proposals, and it has its own thoughts behind it. It raises some issues and it has questions. But together, all these, let's say, 10 unitary projects, what I understand is they make, like, in adding more units of complexity to this type of assemblage, what I think it does is not only shows and visualizes what some of the problems in these systems are, but it really also sees where they are connected. And that's where I think of transdisciplinarity. When I looked at it, of course, they all 10 projects have a more or less common denominator, but they are, let's say, entering these questions from a different disciplinary perspective. So if this collective work, if we get used to this type of collective work where 10 projects think more and better than one or two, then we really can think of these type of projects, collective projects, as forms of assemblages. So it's really an assemblage. Something changes in one, there is an impact in all the rest, right? So that's where I see it. Perhaps a little bit abstract, or I'm abstracting it a little bit too much, but that's what I could kind of extract from it, that there are a lot of units of complexity involved in let's say, in this collective endeavor.
All right, thank you. With this idea, I think that wraps it up very well. I think you can all be content with the work for now, and I want to thank Heidi and also Chris and, well, you guys for yes. All right, bye everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Congratulations,
Thank
everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.